OpenAI just announced GPT 5.6. Well, actually, three versions of GPT 5.6. We've got Sol, we've got Terra, and we've got Luna. There's also a new Ultra mode that uses multiple agents. The flagship model is setting new coding records. And OpenAI says that it spent more than 700,000 A100 equivalent GPU hours trying to jailbreak this thing, and they couldn't do it. But here's a twist. Welcome back to Touchdown with AI. I'm Thierry Damiba, and today we're breaking down GPT 5.6, what is actually new, and more importantly, what does this mean for people who use ChatGPT? Because the model announcement is impressive, but for me, the rollout is the real story. The first thing OpenAI is changing is the naming system. GPT 5.6 is the generation, Sol, Terra, and Luna are the capability tiers. Sol is the flagship model. Terra is supposed to be the balanced everyday option. OpenAI would compare it to GPT 5.5 while costing half as much. And Luna is going to be the small, cheap model that runs fast, token efficient, etc. And honestly, I think this naming system makes more sense than the mess we've had for the last few years. I'm sure they'll get roasted for changing the naming system again, but I like this. The generation tells you how new the model is, and then the name tells you where it sits in the lineup. You don't need to remember whether Mini, Turbo, Pro, or some random collection of letters is supposed to be the smart one. Sol is the big model, Terra is the middle, Luna is the fast one. Simple. At least until there's like 14 variants of each, but I trust that they won't do that. So for me, the biggest feature is actually not any of the benchmark scores. It's the new reasoning mode. So GPT 5.6 introduces a max reasoning setting, which gives Saul more time to think. But the interesting one to me is the ultra setting. OpenAI says ultra goes beyond a single agent by using sub-agents to accelerate complex work. This sounds like a small thing, but it's actually a pretty major product shift. ChatGPT is no longer picking a smarter model through routing and letting it think longer. The system can actually split the problem into pieces, send those pieces to separate agents, and combine the results. So instead of the model working through a research task sequentially, you can have one agent gathering sources, another checking the numbers, another writing code, and another trying to find mistakes. It's basically a team of models sitting behind one ChatGPT conversation. And I think that's where ChatGPT is clearly headed, right? It's not just going to be a chatbot anymore. It's going to be a workspace where you give the system a goal, it decides how much intelligence and coordination the job requires, and it assembles the right amount of compute behind the scenes. Let's take a look at the benchmarks. We do. So now let's dig into the benchmarks on Terminal Bench 2.1, which evaluates command line work involving planning, iteration, and tool use. GPT 5.6 Sol scored 88.8%. Sol Ultra scored 91.9%. And just for comparison, GPT 5.5 scored 88%. So while there is a base model improvement, it's not like it's completely crushing the previous generation. The improvement actually comes from orchestration, which I think is very interesting, right? If you give a model subagents, all of a sudden the score jumps. And that distinction is really important, once again, because we're reaching a point where the next major increase in capability isn't going to come from just making one model smarter. It's going to come from giving a bunch of strong models a way to somehow work together. And that's a really different scaling curve than what we're used to, right? Because for a long time, we've just been looking forward to these model releases because it's all about the model, all about the model. Now we're starting to think about, wait a second, if I take this model and I orchestrate it differently, I can get better results. So as users as well, we care a lot about how these companies are orchestrating their models and not just, hey, is the base model better, right? But we have to talk about the weird part, right? The elephant in the room, which is that OpenAI is going the Anthropic way, if you will, and they're not releasing GPT 5.6 broadly today. The models are entering a limited preview through the API and Codex for a small group of trusted organizations. OpenAI says the participants have been shared with the US government and that it previewed the models and their capabilities to the government before launch. The company also says it does not want this kind of government process to become the long term default. It's a pretty extraordinary paragraph to put in a product announcement. Like, if you've ever read Harry Potter, there's this scene where Dolores Umbridge is giving a speech, and Harry and Ron basically turn to Hermione and they're like, "Hey, can you explain what just happened? Because we didn't really understand the Umbridge talk." And then Hermione breaks it down for them. So let me be your Hermione for what OpenAI is effectively saying. We built a model powerful enough that we're not comfortable putting it directly into ChatGPT yet. The government asked us to slow down. We agreed temporarily. We don't want every future model release to work this way. So OpenAI has made the tension public. They are saying out loud that they want to ship frontier models quickly and that it's the government who increasingly wants visibility before the models reach hundreds of millions of people, right? And ChatGPT users are unfortunately just caught in the crossfire. The main reason around the caution appears to be cybersecurity. OpenAI says that ChatGPT 5.6 Saw is the most capable cyber model yet. It can find vulnerabilities, identify exploitation primitives, and perform long horizon security work more efficiently than the earlier models. The company says it did not autonomously produce a full working exploit chain on its Chromium and Firefox evaluations, so it doesn't cross OpenAI's cybercritical threshold. But OpenAI also admits that the benchmarks cannot represent every real world workflow or combination of tools. Let me put on my Hermione hat again. The translation there is that the model didn't cross the official line, but OpenAI is still nervous about what happens when people connect this to real systems. And that's why GPT 5.6 has a much heavier safeguard stack. The model can refuse a request, there's real time classifiers that can inspect output while it's being generated, and a larger reasoning model can pause the response and approve or deny the conversation. Any flagged activity can trigger account level review across multiple conversations. So for future ChatGPT users, more capability may also mean more moments where the response takes longer, gets reviewed, or is even outright blocked, right? And that's a trade off that is going to start to become more and more visible. We saw the same thing when Fable 5 came out. If you asked any kind of query that had anything to do with security, it would kick you onto Opus and say, hey, have fun down there. So I've given you the information. Now let's talk about my reaction. Uh, I think GPT 5.6 looks less like a model announcement and more like a preview of the next version of ChatGPT. I say this because, first, model selection has gotten a lot easier, right? You just choose between intelligence, balance, or speed. Simple. Second, deep reasoning is now becoming an explicit product feature. It's not just, hey, the model can think longer, but it's, hey, the model can deploy a group of agents to achieve this task in a more effective way while keeping the top level context top of mind. And then third, safeguards are moving beyond just the conversation, right? The system is starting to look at behavior over time, what tools are being used, and the risk of the overall workload. So, the best model may no longer arrive in ChatGPT on announcement day. The frontier model is becoming something that gets staged, evaluated, and gradually released based on who you are, what you're doing, and who you know. And that's a really different product from the ChatGPT most people started using 3 years ago. And I also kind of want to mention, I think these labs are playing a dangerous game with these limited releases because there's already a lot of aminosity and let's say lack of support for data centers. And if part of the pitch is now going to be that we need these data centers to train models that you're not even going to have access to, it's going to be a really hard sell. So I don't know if the labs feel like they already have enough data centers, so they're not worried about public perception, but I really don't think that this is going to end well because the average person is just not really going to be a fan of this, and not just not going to be a fan, it's going to make them angry. I think seeing that some people get access to these models and they don't, and by the way, the data center is in their backyards, right? So yeah, it's definitely interesting times that we're headed towards, but I feel the need to mention that because A lot of people looked at the Anthropic Fable thing as a marketing tactic, and a lot of people are looking at this OpenAI thing as a marketing tactic. I'm not that cynical. Obviously, it's great marketing, but there are real risks to having this technology in anyone's hands, especially bad actors. But there's even foot guns for good actors. But this kind of disconnect between the what would appear to be aminosity from the average person towards AI in general and these limited releases, while also going to those people and saying, hey, can we build a data center in your backyard? I'm not exactly sure how that pitch shakes out. So now let's talk about some nuts and bolts for my devs out there. Sol's going to cost $5 per million input tokens and $30 per million output tokens. Terra is half that price, and then Luna is going to be $1 in and $6 out. OpenAI says Sol will run on Cerebras at up to 750 tokens per second, starting in July for select customers. 750 tokens per second is insane. If you're not familiar with like this kind of stuff, it's absolutely insane because now we're getting into a situation where the model could, or I shouldn't even say the model, the system could reason, delegate work, use tools, check the results, and respond before you even have time to read it, which is like very sci-fi, very futuristic, and I love that. So GPT 5.6 is here. But the model is only half the story. Once ChatGPT can spin up subagents, use tools, and act across real systems, the question stops being just how smart is it, and it becomes, what can each agent access? What actions require approval? How do you enforce policy on every tool call? And who is accountable when the agent asks? That's a layer we think about at Arcade. Models are getting smarter, but for us, the race isn't how well they can reason. The race is making sure that they can do real work without giving them unlimited authority. And that's the real ChatGPT 5.6 story. It's not just a better chatbot. It's a more capable workforce and a much bigger authorization problem. So if you're out there building agents for the enterprise, go to arcade.dev, check out our product. My name is Terry Damiba. I'm a developer evangelist, and thank you for joining.